So Varun, I want to start with the the kind of problem statement you have picked up. Everyone knows that healthcare is broken, hospitals are painful, but apparently nobody has tried to kind of really resolve that problem or solve that problem. What we have seen attempts like kind of which are very peripheral to real healthcare, appointment system and bunch of other things, or delivery of medicine, which is not changing pharma or which is not changing hospitals the way they work. Very little innovation has come from the
Mm,
startups. There is innovation
mm,
happening on the kind of technology that is coming in through these tests and the way surgeries are happening, robotics and all. But from a startup side, there is very little innovation that we've seen in healthcare. So to begin with, like you are taking it head on. Like hospital is almost like synonymous with healthcare. That's where all the things happen. So how did you come up with this?
yeah.
Other brief thought.
Yeah, actually, Amit, as you know, there are three of us founders at Superhealth, right? And funnily enough, I mean, we've known each other for almost 10 years. We worked together over many of these decades. And, we each of us at various points in our lives sort of ended up arriving at what has now become the idea behind Superhealth quite independently. So unlike in some other cases, not like we had a brainstorm saying, "Bhai, ab kya karna hai?" So healthcare has been, on our mind, certainly on my mind for, at least 10 years. So I spent 5 of those at Practo. I joined it quite early, as you know, we had just done like Series A or something. When we looked at that, I said, yeah, okay, what does the customer want? Right? Forget all this complexity of platform technology. And, as we were thinking through this, we realized that, look, there are three things that will always be true in healthcare from what a customer wants. The first is they will always want very high quality of care. Second, they will always want it to be as affordable as possible. Right. And number three is that they would want it to be as convenient as possible. Right. Like this was true 30 years ago. This is true today. And this will be true 30 years from now, from what a customer wants. Now, whether someone is doing it or not is separately. So we try to really introspect and figure out. And we also tried very hard, right? Like a lot of money has been spent from venture and other capital sources. A lot of brain power has been applied to this. So we're like, why solve right? And we realized that actually what is happening when we looked at what we had learned from our experience and what others were doing around us, we had 3, 4 different sort of insights into what is going on, right? Like I think the first is that when we looked at it, we realized that in healthcare, this agent or platform model from a customer standpoint doesn't work. If you are a entity that tells a customer at the end of a fine print saying, hey, if something bad happens to you, I'm not responsible, you will never have the customer trust, which means that all the loyalty will lie with whoever is the entity treating the person and taking responsibility for the treatment. And that will translate in multiple ways as a business model issue, right? So first is you will not have trust. You will continuously keep paying for customers. You will not have repeat customers, etc. So we realized that actually the thin platform doesn't work. You have to be a deliverer of care. You have to be the care. You have to do the hard work, right?
Correct.
Delivering the care. The second thing is we looked at saying that there are some people who've tried to solve, like you said, adjacencies, right? So as an example, they've tried to solve medicine delivery. They've done a great job. You can get medicines in half an hour. It's great. But it isn't really the anxiety point of customers, right? Because it's not like medicines were not available, right? Like pharmacies are quite well distributed. In fact, probably on par, if not better than most FMCG stores. So they made it added layer of convenience to it, but it didn't really solve the core healthcare anxiety problem. It's also not really the biggest spend of healthcare, right? And I think the third one we realized is that there are people who tried solving this, but they ended up doing single specialty. And the problem with single specialty is that, the first is that, well, you have no lifetime value of a customer, right? Because a family has various healthcare needs. And, even if, let's say, you are an orthopedic center and you do a great job with, say, my mother's knee, next time when my dad has some gastro issue, even if I love you, I can't come to you, right? Because I have to go somewhere else. So what that ends up doing structurally, right, is that instead of optimizing for lifetime value of the customer, the institution starts optimizing for the episodic care of the customer, which means एक बार आएगा इससे कितना पैसा बना सकते हैं क्योंकि अगली बार आएगा कि नहीं पता नहीं, right? And so what that does is that sort of starts leading into lack of trust, right? So we therefore had 3 big takeaways saying that, look, if we are serious about solving healthcare, then the first is we have to be the provider. The second is that we have to really solve for multi-specialty, right? And third is that we have to do the hard part of the delivery of care, not just the adjacency. So for us, therefore, it was a natural conclusion saying that there is nothing you can meaningfully change in from a patient life and anxiety in healthcare unless you deliver the care, which means you have to build a multi-specialty hospital. Then, so that's kind of gave us the construct, right? And then we started thinking about, okay, there are many multi-specialty hospitals, right? And obviously India, at the, let's say the tier 1 hospital level, delivers pretty decent care. In fact, I would argue that in many cases, our care delivery at these places are at par with global, right? And we are 1/10 of the price in many cases, right? So, when a large hospital sort of says this, it's not like they're wrong. The problem is that at 1/10, it's still too expensive for most of India. right? So if you and sort of like, how do you sort of valid triangulate that, right? You say that, well, let's look at insurance premiums, because insurance today is about 55% of every hospital's revenue mix, right? And insurance is typically, let's say, if you look at the claim ratio for insurance providers today, they are operating anywhere between 95 to 110%, right? Which basically means that they're collecting 100 rupees of premium and paying out anywhere between 95 to 110 rupees as claims. Now, if you were to sort of remove the healthcare hat and the nobility hat and say that, well, if they were a regular subscription company, where would we like this to be, right? And you get to a point, you say that, well, they should not be more than 50-60% of payouts, right? Like as a so 40% to margin bachna chahiye, usme se some profitability will come, right? So what does that mean, right? The only way that can happen is that if either they double the premiums, which means that penetration will fall, most people will not take insurance, or even less coverage than they have now. India anyway has only 3 to 5 lakhs of coverage on average, or the cost has to become half, right? Because only then the 95-100% payout will become 50%, right? Now, when you look at the biggest and the most profitable hospitals in India, and the public listed ones are say Apollo and Max, right? And you look at their public results, you realize that they're making anywhere between 25-26% to 28-29% EBITDA. So where is the margin to cut the 50%, right? So that kind of said that, okay, if we want to do a hospital, right, it is not enough for us to make one more hospital. We have to think through deeply the model of the hospital, because that's really the only way in which we can solve this cost problem, right? Because if a large number of people who have money, right, we're still not talking about the people who are sort of, in the lower income segments. I'm saying even people with like 15 lakhs plus of household income, 20 lakhs plus of household income, 3 to 5 lakhs of insurance, etc., are still struggling to pay a lot of their healthcare bills. It is an anxiety in many people's mind. And so unless we fix this, right, the model has to be fixed, because it's not like hospitals are at 70% EBITDA, right? So then we started looking at that and saying that, okay, why does this cost so much? Why, like what's happening, right? It's, if you look at any typical hospital, it'll cost you about 2 crores a bed to make a hospital, right? So if you're making a 500 bed hospital, at ribbon cutting, you're out like 1,000 crores in capex, right? So we're like, why does it cost so much, right? And when we started, in our past backgrounds, and we looked at, what the project teams are doing at the hospitals I used to work at, etc., I realized that, there is this very interesting contradiction within the business model, where a very large amount of money in the capex ends up being spent because they want to solve the most complex cases like transplants, etc. At the same time, most of these complex cases, right, actually don't make money for the hospital, right? So in many cases, you will find that, a typical transplant, which says anywhere between 15 to 20 lakhs, let's say on average 17-18 lakh rupees of bill value, right? This will be about -5 to -10% EBITDA for a hospital. So they're losing money on this, right? And so when that happened, I started thinking about, okay, the only reason for you to spend so much capex and lose money on the business is because obviously this must be very high volume, because customers want this, you have to do it. When I looked at the volume, I realized all of this put together is only 1% of the volume, right? So we're like, okay, that is not making any sense to me. Why are we doing this? Why don't we just not do this, right? And then I really understood why they do it, right? The reason they do it is because hospitals are stuck in a vicious loop with the doctors. Okay, and it's not the doctor's fault, right? This is just how the model has evolved. And so what happens is that if you think of just the big hospital chains, right, there is no real differentiator between them, right? They're all 300-500 beds. They all have the same machines from GE or Siemens or whatever. They have the same kind of doctors. So there is no real differentiator between them opposed to the small hospitals, right? So the customer thinks big hospital versus small hospital. Big hospital looks nice, so probably is fine. Small hospital, I don't know what quality of care is. I'm not going to go there, right? And we'll come to the small hospital issues in a bit, right? And so there is no real differentiator in the high-end hospitals, right? You go in Apollo, Max, Narayana, Medanta, whatever name you take, you think they're interchangeable as a customer, right? This is, by the way, not true in most other categories, right? So, for example, if you had, 1 crore to buy a car, you will have a very clear distinction between why you're going to buy an Audi or a Mercedes or a BMW, even though they all cost the same. So, whether it's real or perceived, in your mind, there is a difference. This doesn't exist in hospitals. So, if there is no differentiator, how will you get a customer to choose you? So, what they do instead of doing all that, they basically acquire doctor practices where already revenue exists. So when you commission a new big hospital, what will typically happen is that there'll be someone running revenue function, someone like me running a revenue function in a big company across all the hospitals, and they will have a unit team. And then before commissioning, the unit CEO and the unit marketing teams will go out in the market, and they'll come back with a list of, okay, these are the key doctors for key specialties we need to hire. Selection is entirely based on their revenue. So they'll say, okay, this guy makes 10 crores a month, this year in revenue for the hospital he's at, this guy makes 20 crores, this guy makes 30 crores, whatever that number is. And that shortlist will be brought back, and our shortlist will be made by revenue. And then we will tell them that, okay, you join our hospital, we'll pay you 22% commission on the bill value, and you join us, right? Now, this doctor will say that, okay, I already get 22% commission. So what else will you give me? Right? So then we give him literally a blank sheet of paper. Okay, and we say, sir, you write whatever you want. Because I already spent 1,000 crores building this center, right? So I need revenue from day one. So what he will then say is that he will put a long list of asks, right? I want my own OT. No one can use my OT. I want my own floor. I want my room to be like this. I want this brand of machine. I want this brand of scalpel. I want this brand of bulb. I want this brand of hinge. I want this nurse. I want that assistant, whatever, right? And pretty much everything we will say yes to because we want that revenue to come. So now let's say this guy was generating 20 crores of revenue in whichever hospital he was in. So he will join us for that 20 crores of revenue and that will come to us. But obviously it will not come on day one because
Sure.
some transition time will take in, some patients will shift, some will not shift, all that. But not like this doctor will take a pay cut, right? So let's say he was making about 4.5 crores of salary annually as 22% commission in income he was generating. So I have to offer that to him upfront as minimum guarantee. Right? So I am paying him already, say, whatever, 30 lakh rupees a month to come and generate this revenue here with zero revenue generated in month one, right? So now whether I explicitly say this or not, right? There is a metric in every hospital that is tracked, which is called MG recovery, right? Which is called minimum guarantee recovery. Whatever minimum guarantee you're paying this doctor, is it getting recovered or not, right? This means that this doctor either explicitly or implicitly has an admission target of how many patients he has to admit every day. This single point of relationship between the hospital and the doctor is the reason for all the problems, right? Because now this doctor has come in. So now the hospital is on the treadmill of having to get patients from this doctor. They built this entire center for this doctor, right? Because when the doctor asked him saying, what else do you want? He gave this white sheet of paper. And then on top, he said, I also want to do transplants. They don't let me do transplants here, right? So then you say yes, and then he comes. But for that, you need to have a transplant setup, right? Now, transplant OT is maybe 5 to 6 times more expensive than a typical OT. You have to build a separate ICU for it. You have to have 2 transplant OTs because, transplant has, donor and receiver and all of that. So the cost of a one OT could be 80, 90 lakhs if it was not doing transplant. But the minute you start saying, I want to do transplant in this with equipment and everything, you're at 5, 6 crores, right? So it's like for one, right? And then you have 2, that's 12 crores, and you need a separate HVAC. So and this is just for transplants, right? Then you have other procedures. So basically, because you spend all this money, you need many, many more beds. And because you need many, many more beds, you need 3 acres of land. And because you need 3 acres of land, which is not available as easily and definitely not cheaply in the cities, you have to now find a way to fill these big beds, right? And therefore, your cost has gone up because the land is expensive, the construction is expensive, the equipment, everything is now expensive because you're at like hyperscale, right? So now, anyway, coming back to this doctor who has come to the OPD, right? He is sitting there and he is saying, okay, let's say he needs to do 10 admissions a day as part of his MG recovery calculation, right? Now, there is an implied sort of like industry rule of thumb saying that, hey, if 100 OPDs are happening, between 8 and 12 people will be admitted, right? 8 to 12%. So let's say 10% as an average for discussion. So he has to do 10 admissions a day, right? But this is a generalized mathematics, right? Maybe today the patients who come didn't need admission, but he has to do 10 today because otherwise if he does only 5 today, he has to do 15 tomorrow. From where will he get 15, right? And now he's behind on MG. So the minute he's behind on MG, someone like me will show up, we'll review and we'll tell him that, boss, this is not okay. MG recovery is not happening. Sir, you need to buck up. How can we support all this? So what will he do? He will make sure that instead of 100 patients that he needed to do 10 admissions, he will get 300 patients in his OPD. It's not like the hospital and the doctor forgot the throughput possible, right? But this is what he's solving for, saying, I don't really care. If you're waiting, you wait, right? This is the reason you wait 3 hours. There's no other reason, right? The second thing is that this is also the reason why he cuts you out of the OPD in 2-3 minutes, right? Because he is running 2 algos in his head. The first algo is diagnosis. Of course, he wants to make sure that you're doing okay. So he wants to diagnose you. But the second algorithm in his mind is, are you admission? Yes, no. If admission, no, please leave ASAP because I'm not making money on you. And I have to do 10 admissions or aaj ka 5 hi hua hai, right? Now imagine in this construct, someone like me or anybody shows up and says, doc, we should be good for patient experience. We should not make him wait. You know what they'll tell you? They'll tell you, I can do this in 2 ways. One, first of all, I'm getting the patient. He's okay to wait for me. I'm getting him for the target you gave me. So if you are not happy with it, you get the patient, which the hospital cannot get, right? Because there is no differentiation for them because everybody makes you wait. Everybody has the same doctors. The second is he will say, Varun, otherwise you reduce my target, which I cannot do. Why can't I do? Because I've already spent 1,000 crores. I built all this. So now we are both kind of like stuck in this stalemate, right? And the reason we are stuck in this is because the model is wrong. So, so I think what has been happening is that we've all been trying to solve this from outside in as a technology problem. It's not a technology problem. It's a model problem, right? So when we said, okay, how do we solve this, right? Because model is a very different problem to solve than say, hey, let's build better tech, right? Imagine in that OPD, all this politics of who has to do MG and all this is going on. A good Samaritan shows up and says, doc, I built the world's best EMR, the best HIS. If you use this technology, it'll change your life. Who cares? That's not what he's solving for, right? And that's why a lot of money that has gone there has actually not fixed this fundamental issue. So what happened was that when we looked at this, we just started understanding procedures by volume and EBITDA rather than by top line, right? And we learned something incredible. We realized that if you index it by volume of procedures in healthcare, right? And sort of like the metric we took as a proxy for complexity of case was length of stay, right? So the simpler the case, the less your length of stay is going to be. This metric is called ALOS, average length of stay. So we when we saw this, we said, okay, what constitutes majority of length of stays, right? What's like, let's say 99 percentile, what is it, right? And when we saw that, we realized 99 percentile has a length of stay less than 2. So the highest volume, highest commoditized cases are also ironically the highest margin, right? So then we said, okay, this is interesting. What does the customer think about this, right? And then we started looking at the customer data, and we realized that over the last 5 to 7 years, customers have already moved to this level of convenience over, name brand doctors for these procedures. So if you, instead of looking at the world of healthcare, which we have been traditionally taught to look at from primary, secondary, tertiary, quaternary, which is honestly a very US insurance provider view of the world, and you look at it purely on the merit of medical complexity and revenue, right, as the two metrics, you realize that actually you should only divide the world in simply saying what is the length of stay. If the length of stay is less than 2 days, right, this is a procedure we will do. And if the length of stay is more than 2 days, this is something that is ultra complicated. Someone else should do it. What we found is that the behavior in healthcare is completely different on either side of the line. So for length of stay greater than 2, right, people are very particular about who is the doctor because they're transplant type procedure, right? So, or, and they want to go to multiple cities. They will go to different countries for it even if they can afford it, right? But the minute you come to length of stay less than 2, you're doing things like appendicitis, piles, maybe even in some cases knee replacements, etc., hernia, all of that. For these procedures, customers today are already not looking to go more than 2-3 kilometers from where they are. Secondly, if you look at search data as a proxy for intent, as in these ALOS less than 2 procedures, what are customers searching for? You find the behavior is very different. For ALOS less than 2, they search by problem statement and not by hospital brand or doctor name. While in greater than 2 ALOS, they search by hospital name, they search by doctor name. They have gone through this process 3-4 times, so they already know. So we said, okay, this is great. If we did not do length of stay greater than 2 cases, the transplant kind of cases, what does that do to the model of healthcare, right? And we realized that it actually completely changes it, right? Because first, what it does is it takes this 2 crores a bed cost, right? And for everything else being exactly the same quality as a tier 1 hospital, it drops it to about 30-35 lakhs.
You're talking about capex per bed.
Yeah, exactly. Cost per bed, right? Which is then, first of all, an insane reduction, right? It's like almost you're losing it by like 80% reduction in cost, right? Which means that you can structurally offer much better, pricing to customers. The second thing we realized is that because of these procedures, customers are already doing hyper-local visits, right? As in they're going to between 3 kilometers, 4 kilometers of where their house is, right? Anyway, over the last 5-7 years, the radius of consideration, how far people are willing to go to meet the doctor or the hospital or get the treatment they want, has been shrinking from 10 kilometers now down to sub 5. It's like 3 to 4 now for many of these procedures. So we said, this is fantastic because now my length of stay is low, which 1.5 days. 2, customers are anyway not willing to travel longer than 2-3 kilometers. 3, these are not the most complex procedures. So I can build a very high-end compact center in the neighborhood, right? And treat all these patients. Now, the minute you start thinking like that, you realize that, this completely changes the model of healthcare because now you can make compact units, which are very high quality, but are very near to you. Like pretty much 15 minutes, you can get to my hospital, right? My throughput is the same as a 150-bed hospital because my length of stay is less, right? So I have more discharges and therefore those 50 beds on turnover is better. So the business model works better, which translates to better quality, better efficiency, better price for customers. And because it's only hyper-local, I'm not worrying about all these different places people are coming from and the procedures are commoditized. My experience is much more predictable. So I can guarantee checkout times or discharge times. I can guarantee admission times. I can pretty much guarantee, in most cases, procedure times. I can give you assured pricing, right? Because the variability is so low. So now suddenly when you say, okay, I only care about ALOS less than 2, then the whole world changes to saying, okay, I could build a hospital that's very high end at 1/3 the cost, provide a 50% lower cost to the customers, provide, much better experience to customers. And that's what we should do as the first stage of what Superhealth is trying to really build out. So that's kind of like how we, through this sort of analysis across all of this, through our real experiences of, various roles we've had in the past, we got all this real data to look at. And that kind of drove us towards doing this. Obviously, big hospitals can't do this, as you can imagine, because one, they have disintermediated themselves for so long from their customers that they, first of all, don't have the DNA to think how to acquire a customer. And secondly, they have a lot of sunk cost, right? They already built these 1,000 crore centers. So if you strip out all their high margin procedures from there and tell them to do that, their whole business model as it stands crumbles. And the reality is that, if they do nothing, right, they will still end up making a few $1 billion next year, right? Because it's not like customers really have a choice, right? Like if you are somebody who says, okay, I reject all this, okay, where are you going to go, right? Because you can't go to the smaller hospitals, right? Because so it's very interesting, for the smaller hospitals now, if you look at sort of the breakup of healthcare, right, from a hospital standpoint, and, a lot of people who are on this call who will probably watch this are not going to neighborhood hospitals because we are unsure about the quality there, right? So we don't really know the quality in the larger centers also, but at least we believe from what it looks like that they have a much better quality, and that's kind of like the best we can get in India today, and it is very good. Let me not say that it's not good. It's pretty good. But the small centers have a lot of issues, right? Because many of the smaller hospitals are essentially hospital centers built by doctors. Doctors are great at treating patients. That does not necessarily mean they're great at building hospitals, right? So what we have found, because when we went and saw 200 such hospitals, right, because our initial thesis was that maybe we should buy out and build a network from scratch rather than building a network from scratch, we found significant deficiencies in these hospitals, right? So apart from the fact that they're mostly single specialty, what that means is that they don't have full service. They don't have MRIs. They don't have CT scans in most cases, right? They have very low grade equipment. Also, the design is not good. So the sterilization flows are almost non-existent, right? Most of them don't even have CSSD departments, which is basically where all the sterilization happens in large hospitals. In some cases, in Indranagar, we saw a hospital, which is very just off of 100 Feet Road, by the way. So it's not like in some remote area, which nice. The hospital looks very nice from the outside. You can't tell. And this is still private healthcare I'm talking about. We went in, we spoke to the doctor, and we said, hey, we would like to see your sterilization area. How do you sterilize all the equipment? And he showed us the room, and it had a pressure cooker in which the scalpels were going, and he was sterilizing it with that. And this center does 300 plus procedures a month. Okay, so it's not like some small, 10 दिन का procedure करता है. Right? It's crazy. We saw one in Koramangala, right? They do, I think, about 250 or so procedures a month, right? And so we went there, and we were waiting outside the OT complex. That is the main door of the OT. We're waiting outside, is saying that patient is inside. So once the patient goes out, we'll go and see what equipment they have. We can assess the equipment, because again, we're still in that acquisition mode of saying we'll buy the hospitals out. And, when we walked in, this electrician walked in with us, right, in his old dirty overalls and all. And so my co-founder asked him in Kannada, saying, where are you going, right? And he told us that, in this building, this whole hospital building, the main MCB is inside the OT complex.
My God.
So the OPD ka AC trip ho gaya hai. So he went inside, he fixed that, walked out, and they just wheeled in the next patient. There was no sterilization, no fumigation, nothing. So we got so freaked out by that, saying that, hey, and by the way, again, let me explain. This is not a remote place. This is not a government hospital or anything. This is a private healthcare which people are going. So why are people going here, right? 95% of India is going to places like this. Private healthcare is going here, right? $100 billion healthcare industry, hospital industry, $5 billion is going to the top hospitals as revenue. 95 is going to these. Why are they doing that, right? The average bill value in a large hospital is between 2 to 3 lakhs, right? The average insurance cover in India for these people is 3 to 5 lakhs, right? So the choice he has to make is that, hey, let me give you an example. So let's say you want to do an appendix operation. So an appendix operation in a neighborhood hospital will cost you about 50,000-60,000 rupees, right, to do it. The same if you go to a tier 1 hospital, say Apollo, Max, Medanta, whatever, right, it's going to cost you about 2.5 lakhs to 2.7 lakhs for the same procedure. So there is that much difference in it's like almost 4 times, 5 times more. He cannot spend 3 lakhs, say 2.7 lakhs on one procedure, right? Because what if mom needs insurance down later in the year? What will I do then? So he says, okay, instead of this, I will compromise. How bad can it be? And I will go to this center here, right? And they make that trade-off and they go there. So now, if you think of this now a little bit more structurally, you realize that, healthcare has, if you are an appendix guy, you have 2 options, right? You can pay 3 lakhs and go to a tier 1 hospital, right? And, go through the frustration of a big hospital, but at least get great hygiene and all of that and a decent treatment. Or you can go to this sort of like, bottom of pyramid hospitals that are the neighborhood hospitals, questionable quality, questionable care, questionable infection rates, but you can do it for 60,000. So we feel there is a big gap between the 60,000 and the 3 lakhs. And we think there is a strong, high quality value play available here, where the guy paying 60,000 has the money to pay 90,000. If I promise him the same quality of care as a tier 1 hospital, right? So what Superhealth's core promise, therefore, is that we've figured out a way to build the same quality of hospital, same quality of infrastructure, and deliver the same quality of care at half the cost of a tier 1 hospital to all the people going to the neighborhood hospitals today, because that's really where 95% of India is being served, right? So that's kind of what our, mission stage 1 is of what we're trying to do.
A couple of questions. One is that, you made a point that people are not willing to go beyond 2, 3, 4 kilometers for a surgery. I mean, it's hard to believe, because like people are going to Zara 15 kilometers away. People are going for a meal at a good restaurant 10 kilometers away. People are doing that. I can understand when it is pregnancy, you want the hospital to be very close to you so that you don't know when you have to But these are elective surgeries. Hernia, you can do it today also, tomorrow also. So is distance that big a barrier here?
It's you're right. It's actually quite a shocking thing. That we sort of learned ourselves, because we started with the same mindset, saying that because our inherent mindset is, if my mom is not well, I want to take him to the best doctor in the world, right? Like, but they can't afford that, right? So let's say you have a hospital 10 kilometers away, which is, I don't know, like, say, I don't know, just say Max. So it's a Max in Delhi, right? Well, if you do the procedure in Max, they will 100% do a much better job than a neighborhood hospital. There is no question, but it will cost you 3 lakhs instead of 60,000. So the patient basically is saying, look, I can't pay 3 lakhs. Neighborhood is where I would like to do, because anyway, I'm not going to the tier 1 hospital. I'm going to the, so why is
There's
that
no
neighborhood hospital better than my
differentiation.
neighborhood hospital, right?
Like you said that there is, sorry, please go ahead.
Right? So that's kind of like the financial angle, right? But if you look at the behavioral pattern, even back when we were at Practor, and this is not even today, this is back in 14, 15, 16, right? When we were doing Practor.com and people were trying to find doctors, our initial search algorithm actually started with this premise, saying that you want the best doctor. So if you say best gastro in Bangalore, right, we would show you the best gastro in Bangalore, right? But what we found very quickly is that 99% of the cases when we did that, and the guy was in Kormangla and the gastro was in Marathalli, the next search was near me. So it is fairly intelligent of customers, although many people don't give them credit for this, where they have already done that risk trade-off in their minds for convenience, right? So see, we are, I think, 10 years later today in 2024, this is even more true than before, right? Because today our customers are already in the hyper convenience economy. This is their expectation, right? So they have already started trading off, the distance to anxiety, right? And that's the reason why when you look at the search data, right, you look at the visitation data for the hospitals, even for the big hospitals, and the minute you cut it by this lens of length of stay less than 2, which is basically non-complex surgeries, even if they're electives, right? Most people are actually doing it in the neighborhood. This is already true. This is like, if you say that today is the world pre-Superhealth, right? We don't have to influence or create this behavior. This is already happening, right? What we have to do is that we have to capture that behavior and deliver a better quality product than what others are giving, right? And we believe that some people do it. So this is something that they're already doing. This is already true today.
So, okay, why I think about it otherwise is because when we are comparing it to a Fortis and, especially Medanta, let's say in Delhi, in Gurgaon, people are coming from Bihar, people are coming
Yes.
from Bengal, people are also coming from, Middle East and everywhere. Probably because, what you mentioned, these are the complex procedures, and for that, people will travel. And the doctor is such, and you have the name and trust and all those things cannot go wrong. So when we are talking about these less complex surgeries, if either I'm rich enough or my insurance is, kind of big enough that it can cover for my stay in a Max or wherever. So
Yes.
then in that case, it doesn't matter Max. I'll not see that it is 5 kilometers or 6 kilometers. If it is Max, I'll go there, right? But if I'm not going to Max and if I'm not going to Medanta and Fortis and, all these, then there's little differentiation, then
Yes.
I might as well. So if there is a better hospital, I'll go there.
Yes.
Because there's similar hospitals, then I'll probably say, okay, whichever is closer. A lot of things back and forth you have to do when you are at a hospital, so things become simpler for you.
Yes.
It's not like one time going there. It's
Yeah.
also like you have to do back and
Also,
forth. Someone is
to
at
your
home,
point, you're
not-
right. You meet once. It's not like the day you go there and I tell you you need an appendectomy, unless it's really hurting and you got admitted in emergency, right? Like you said, hernia, you'll come back 2 days later. You will want a second opinion. So you'll do all this, right? And then you'll come back. And therefore, which is why one of the reasons we wanted to make a multi-specialty was this, right? Because, every health incident in that family is an opportunity for them to try Superhealth now, right? And see how much better our quality and service is and how much
Right.
better value we deliver. And therefore,
Right.
once they tried once, they just keep sending the rest of the family members to us as well. At least that's the
Right.
hope, that we'll do such a good job. And, and that allows us to sort of wedge ourselves in. The other interesting thing, Amit, also that in this is that, unlike many other industries in some ways, right? Healthcare in India remains deeply supply constrained. We are, as a country, 3 million hospital beds short. And this is across cities, right? It's not like tier 1 cities are, very full of hospitals and all that. That's not really true. It's certainly more acute in tier 2, 3 markets, but it is as bad in tier 1 markets, right? So you just go in July, August in a hospital and try to get a bed. Dengue cases alone will fill the hospital. It's very common. So, one good thing is that for Superhealth to win, nobody has to lose. There's enough demand, right? I think the other benefit or sort of like, I guess, good going for us is that as of today, hospitals don't really inspire some lot of brand love and loyalty, right? It's more lack of choice than, oh my God, I love Max. Nobody is saying that, right? Whatever, I mean, Max, I'm using as an example, but you pick your hospital brand, right? So there is deep distrust that exists today in the customer's mind, right? Because what is the typical mindset of a guy, even who's going to a Max, or even the guy going to the Max with money? right? What is the trade-off he's doing in his mind? He's saying, I'll go to Max, it'll be clean, doctor must be decent, equipment will be okay, 3 घंटा वेट करूंगा, डॉक्टर 2 मिनट देखेगा, मुझे कुछ रैंडम प्रोसीजर करेगा, पता नहीं चाहिए कि नहीं, टेस्ट लिखेगा, पता नहीं चाहिए कि नहीं, बिलिंग में मेरा पक्का कटेगा. But I would because I have money, I would rather take the money on risk than go to a smaller center with lower quality, right? Because the smaller centers are lower quality today. Like, it's not like they're wrong.
Yeah.
So which is what we went out and found out when we visited these 200 centers. We realized that no, the customer has been intelligent enough to understand through sort of like the, like the tribal word of wisdom, right? Saying that the nearby hospitals are not as great quality, right? So they are doing it purely from a cost standpoint. It's not like they don't like big hospitals, right? It's a cost question. If they could afford to go there, they would go there. The cost for those hospitals cannot come down to what they can afford, right? Because the model is wrong.
Like, Varun, you mentioned that, there are these big hospitals which are like corporates and they can afford that capex, then they have to kind of get that returns on that capital, and that's where all these practices come in. And on the other side, there are these smaller hospitals, the neighborhood hospitals, which are typically doctor-led.
Yes.
In another industry, we'll call them, mom and pop stores.
Yes.
But typically in most industries, we see that spectrum. You took the example of a car also. Like, you see cars at every price point. They may not be differentiated in that sense, especially in the early, smaller price segments. But they're like, go and you're actually spoiled for choice. For every 20,000 rupees more, there is a variant or
Yes.
some version there, right? Why is there such a big gap that there is a hospital which does a surgery for 60,000 rupees and the same surgery then is at 5-6 times in another big hospital? There is no one in between. You are trying to fit in gap, but why does that gap exist? Such a big gap. That is not true for most industries.
Yeah, I think the question, it's a great question. We have to understand how each of these, what is the genesis of each of these type of care centers, right? So imagine that, actually you're right that you're quite right that, the individual centers are actually, they're not enterprises, right? They're essentially a building built around that doctor's practice for one of two reasons, right? Either because he wanted more growth in life, right? And he was not being made the HOD because he couldn't bring his so many patients in the hospital. Either that was the reason, so he left. Or, he refused to misprescribe things to his patient or push his patients to surgeries and tests for the revenue reasons. Second. Or third could be that, he's an entrepreneurial guy, which is a few percentage of people, and he just wanted to run his own setup, right? So all these three various reasons. But make no mistake, that place is not an enterprise, right? It's kind of like a grown-up clinic where he doesn't have to do rev share with anybody else. He has his own practice and he takes 100% of the bill value. At which point, there is a question of, what are the rates that he will be able to charge at that point, at that level, and what customers are willing to pay for that quality of care, what they perceive as that quality of care. And that's kind of like how that costing gets bucketed. So he says that, look, I was charging so much money because his patients are also asking this question, saying that, hey, because basically the flow of that hospital is his patients. It's his patient volume, right? So what he tells them is that, look, if you go and do this procedure in Apollo, it'll be 3 lakhs. If you come to my hospital, I'll do it for 70,000, right? And so the patient knows the doctor. He says, okay, I'll come and do it here. Because he's doing this as an outreach clinic, and then he grows up into this hospital setting, right? Ideally, he should be able to scale this, right? Like if you were, if you were sort of like a car company that started with saying, hey, we found this, like it's an inverse example, but look at Tesla as an example. They kind of built this $100,000 car, sold 10,000 of them, used that to build a broader one. And they were able to, as an organization, scale, right? And then address these multiple price points. Because this is not really enterprise, it's more like a mom and pop shop, right? The scaling doesn't happen because the doctor doesn't know how to do it. Secondly, the doctor does not become an entrepreneur in most cases. He remains the treating doctor and he wants all that saying, I am the doctor, I will only do procedure here, right? And because there is no fundamental value addition to that center beyond him bringing his patients, for him to grow, either his patients have to grow, which has obviously human limitations of how many procedures and patients he can see in a day, or he has to hire other doctors to bring their patient volume, which is what kind of like a smaller version of what the big hospitals. The minute he does that, right, he now has a new doctor who also has patients. But this doctor, as the owner of the hospital, wants the doctor to listen to him, right? That doctor, why should he listen to him? He's bringing his own patients, right? So he is not able to really build and scale this aggressively. And that's why you will find that, most of these centers, at best, they're able to do 2. Some isolated cases, they can build 3. Because he wants to be the dominant procedure person in all 3, right? And that's one of the reasons why the hospital, the big hospitals are not, it's not like they have not tried to enter this segment, right? Like if you look at people, like say Apollo tried this with Spectra, right? They tried to build these smaller hospitals. The challenge they faced is, this is my assessment at least, that I think the big hospital DNA took over when they put Spectra in, because what they ended up doing is that, they bought it from Nova and they said that, look, we are going to build a very high-end, high-quality center. which is available to all the doctors and everybody, and you come and do your patient here, and we'll do a 60-40 revenue split, for example. Like, I don't know the exact numbers, but let's say that was something like that was a number, right? So at 60, when the doctor brought the patient, right, the patient came because the doctor said so. So in every month, there was one more hospital nearby that had a tie-up with that doctor who said, hey, I'll give you 65. You bring the patient to me, right? So structurally over time, very quickly what ended up happening is that Spectra as a center became a high capex, low margin infra as a service model. And therefore they didn't make money, right? If they had done their own OPD and got patients themselves, right? But the big hospitals don't have that DNA, right? Because the doctor is there to bring the patient. That's what the doctor is paid for. That's what the 22% is for, right? So they are not able to come out of this mindset, right? There's another hospital who tried this, which was Columbia Asia. Right? Columbia Asia tried sort of the other way, where they came in and said that, okay, we want to do local hospitals, we'll do small hospitals, hyper local, we deliver in the neighborhood, we'll get young doctors, not the HODs. So in some ways, spiritually similar to what we are trying to do. But the mistake I think they made in the model is that again, the big hospital DNA took over. Right? And in Columbia Asia's mind as an organization, a 250 bed hospital was a small hospital because they were used to building 500-700 bed hospitals, right? They spent 2 crores a bed to build a 250 bed hospital. Now, 250 bed hospital for a neighborhood is a very big hospital. And they said, we'll do transplants also, we'll do everything. So they didn't commit to the neighborhood need. They kind of had the right directional idea, but they didn't execute it because the organizational DNA said, no, we need all this. And therefore, they were not able to break even. And because they couldn't break even, at some point, they had to go back to the old model of saying, let's get the sales guys in to give commissions and get the doctors on board, right? And that didn't work. So what we realize is that, while people have tried to attempt this, they haven't really committed to the model fully to deliver it in a manner. And that's why for us, the 50 bed thing is a very important point, right? Because a 3 kilometer radius area में 50 bed to be full requires only 4% of OPD market share, right? What that does is that it takes the complete pressure off the system to get patient, which means that you are now fundamentally incentivized to do the right thing for the patient and allow some long-term brand value to get built, right? Where patients say about Superhealth saying, hey, you go to Superhealth, they don't make you wait. You go to Superhealth, the doctor spends time with you. Hey, you go to Superhealth, he doesn't prescribe you faltu mein tests. They don't prescribe you faltu mein. This is the word of mouth Superhealth wants to generate. The way we are doing this is by changing the doctor model, by changing the incentives and changing the revenue pressures. So our approach is actually to fix the model. There isn't just a technology solution for this. That's kind of like why I think the gap continues to exist. By the way, just as a side anecdote, when I got started this idea of what has now become Superhealth, the first person I called was Dr. Alex, right? Because I called him after I learned all this, at Apollo. And I kind of saw some of these insights and I was like, hey, this seems like a pretty big thing. Maybe we should do it. And so I called him and I said that, hey, Dr. Alex, I have this idea. So I met him, as all startup origin stories go at Starbucks. And I told him, Dr. Alex, I have this idea. It seems like a pretty obvious idea. It seems like a big idea. So why is nobody doing this? And so he said, first of all, it is not some new idea you got. Okay, this idea has been there for 15 years. The problem is no one has executed this in the manner in which you're doing it because either people come from big hospitals and they don't know how to do this at rapid scaling, or people from consumer tech, they've never seen the inside of a hospital and they think technology will solve all problems. Because you have seen Practo from a technology standpoint, seen Ola as a technology and infra player from a scale with electric, and you have also seen, a couple of years of Apollo as a full scale hospital system. You're able to navigate the gaps a little bit more intelligently. Therefore, you're seeing this better, right? But this is an absolute opportunity. You should totally do this. And so once we decided that, we'll start Superhealth, I called Doc and said, please stop, let's do it together. And, she was kind enough to join us and became a co-founder.
Nice. But Varun, a little bit more pushback
Sure.
on that part. See, typically, like in this case also, you have Dr. Alex with you. So you have your own experience in healthcare, but on the business side. But he's a full-fledged doctor who has seen it done what healthcare professional does. And you're coming together and, kind of doing this. In a lot of startups, today it is not as critical, but earlier there used to be a business co-founder and a tech co-founder. Like without that, it's very hard to build.
Yes.
Without becoming a lot commoditized, the tech part. But people would come together. How? They would have worked in the similar companies and all. In other cases, we have seen, like in DTC brands, we are seeing that, the family had a business in certain things, and then the son comes and he says, I want to do something in this tech space and this and that. They will build, they're the supply things sorted, ops sorted, and all those. They will build a brand and they will kind of do the customer side of things while the supply is taken care of by the family business. So they would be like maybe some doctor as a hospital and which is doing okay and great, whatever. And they say, no, I want to make a chain out of it. I want to take it to the next level. We have seen it everywhere. Like, we have seen in QSRs also. Like like Haldiram is now $10 billion. They don't have a very big place in one city and then everyone is coming to them. They are the neighborhood mithai shop now, which was not earlier. Right? So Why is it, still, I understand the big hospital false starts were there. And the smaller side, for most people, I'll agree that doctors, once they start earning few crores and they say, I'm busy, I want to be known as a better doctor rather than an entrepreneur, and now my money thing is taken care of, fix something that is not broken. But there would be someone who would come with more ambition and say, let me do 10 of these. Or just they say that, okay, let me make a bigger hospital, and that becomes a corporate hospital. I don't know, how is it?
You're right. You're absolutely right. So, the two things, Mamit. I think two great examples of this, right, are actually Apollo and Narayana, right, where there were two doctors who figured out how to scale this problem well, and the outcome was Apollo, and outcome was Narayana, right? They were both started by doctors, right? So, anytime doctors have figured out how to build a scalable team, the opportunity has been there, right? I think in this case, what happens is that when people so now you have these big doctors with the big hospitals. For them, there is no incentive to do the hyperlocal setup, right? For others to do this hyperlocal setup, I think it's a capital structure problem, right? Who is the person who will put money to do that first hospital, right?
But once they have,
Huh? That's what I'm saying.
first
So
they have.
no. First, no. So I'm saying first, usne apna hospital that doctor is doing. So the doctor who's already built his first hospital needs to find an equal footing with the person who can help him scale, right? So far, in many cases, that has not happened, which means that mostly the doctor only has to scale, right? Like he has to scale into a business leader rather than just being a doctor, right? Now, once that happens, he has to find a way for this business to continue, right? And to do this. Now, let us say that this is pre-start, right? This is like people like me and Dr. Alex have gotten together and said, hey, let's build this, right? It is not a business that VCs love. Let me let me just put it like that, right? So there are 2-3 different access to capital you have, right? If you want to build, let's say 10 hospitals you want to build, even at our, even let's say you want to do a traditional hospital model, you are looking at say 50 beds, even at 40 lakhs, looking at 10 hospitals, you're looking at 200 crores, right? 150 crore to come se, right? So if you're plus equipment cost, right? So you're looking at this model where you're saying, okay, all this money has to come in. Somebody has to fund this, right? So you can go to a venture capital, you can go to a private equity, or you can go to a bank, right? These are your typical, of course you have angels, which is why we are talking, but I'll come to you as to how we arrived at this, right? When you go to venture capital, everybody will tell you, hey, do the first one. We don't really like this. We like SaaS thesis. Why don't you put an AI doctor in 3 slides in front before you pitch the hospital? Blah, 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 right? Like, we don't get an infra business. What is the hockey stick growth here? All that, right? So you talk to an EVC, they will tell you all this, right? I think they have not yet gotten over the fear of offline businesses like they have gotten over it in D2C brands, right? Like, they're happy to make a Mokobara store for $2 million, but they're just hesitant about this because it's a complex business, right? It's not, I'm not blaming them, but and they're not able to see the ROI because no one has done it. Private equity, same problem, right? Private equity says that, hey, you need to have, I can't come at zero, right? You have to be at some scale. You go to a bank, the bank will say, hey, I want to give you debt. So what pledging will you do? What land you have? At the minute you go into the land pledging business, right? You have messed up your capex, right? Because now you've gone to the same deal of a debt with the bank doing all this, right? So one of the reasons why we are trying to do this raise through a network of angels, right, is that as customers of healthcare, we have seen very strong resonance from the average intelligent consumer when we say, hey, we want to fix this. We believe there is a strong return possible here. And I think eventually the venture ecosystem broadly will see it also. But I think that has been one of the biggest reasons why it's not happening, right? Like, however, that being said, recently I heard Even has raised $30 million to build hospitals. A Policy Bazaar, in my conversation with Yashish, as well as I think they've now put it in stock exchanges also, they have earmarked $100 million to build 5-6 hospitals in Delhi. So they are getting around to the fact that if you want to do healthcare well, you have to build a hospital. I think in the past, some of these capital routes were not available to people, right? And I think therefore that's been one of the major stumbling blocks into this as well. And therefore the doctor had to always become the source of capital, which means he has to do the thing, which means someone else has to do the business. There was always an employee promoter relationship and not really a partnership. And I think, and I don't know how true this is, but I feel it's a very strong, important point, at least what helps us do this better and faster, at least in Superhealth's case, is that not only between the three of us, we have complementary skills, but I think because we know each other for 10 years and have worked together in similar context of healthcare, right, we have a lot of overlapping language and skills also, right? So, for example, when I, say something like, hey, why can't we have barcode scanners solving sterilization in an automated manner and not have honor code system of register entries, right? Dr. Alex doesn't freak out because he understands what I'm saying, because he knows the language of what I'm talking about, and then we discuss it and we come up with a better solution. Similarly, having been both outside in healthcare and inside in healthcare, when he starts talking about CSSDs and sterilization flows and OT lights and all that, I don't get zone out because I know what that is, right? So there is enough commonality. So it seems to me like this is fated in some ways, if I get a little philosophic. But I think those are some of the reasons why so far it has not really been pushed very aggressively. But I encourage everyone to do it, guys. It's a great business. Even if it's not a venture business, you can build one hospital, build it. It's a massive shortage. People need great hospitals. Everybody should build a hospital, I think.
So, Varun, I think I would have asked that question later, but maybe, if you can talk more about yourself and
Sure.
Manoj also, maybe
Yeah,
Dr.
of
Alex
course.
over there. What gives you this, what is the background of folks and how does it put you in good place to run?
Sure. So before starting Superhealth, I spent the last couple of years as the chief revenue officer for Apollo Hospitals, where I work with Ms. Sunita and the promoter team to be responsible for revenue across the 70 hospitals in India. Just to give you a sense to the audience, Apollo has 70 hospitals across India. They do about 12,000 crores of top line, which was my KRA directly. And that's about 10,000 beds. Prior to that, I spent about 3 years working with Bhavesh, building Ola Electric from 19 to 2022. This is way before we had bought it or go, we had a scooter, we had nothing, right? And we kind of built that with nothing into pretty much 40% market share by the time I left Electric in July 2022. And prior to that, I spent 5 years at Practo. I got to Practo quite early. Actually, it's been interesting that, when I got to Ola, Electric was just kind of transitioning from being, a B2B, a battery as a service, auto rickshaw type of play that they were doing with mass transport to actually a pure D2C with scooters, bikes, and I'm sure eventually cars. When I got to Practo, this is in 2014, we had just done Series A, I think 4 million from Sequoia or something like that. And Practo was just moving from being a pure play software for doctors and clinics company to actually starting Practo.com, right? And it was just moving into the consumer space. And when I joined, Practo.com was doing about 100,000 MAU. People coming looking for doctors, etc. And then by the time I left in 2019, we had grown it from 100,000, and I was the marketing person there. So we grew it from 100,000 to about 25 million, a month, which was quite amazing. And then of course I went to Ola, and then prior to that I spent 4.5 years at Qualcomm, and I went 10 to 14, and I got to Qualcomm just when India was pivoting from 2G to 3G and 4G. 2010 was when the auctions were. So I spent a lot of time working with the China device ecosystems and ODMs and building that $100 smartphone projects in India, bringing those to India to brands like Micromax and doing market development funding for them, bringing those to market on the one side, so the device IDs. On the other side, we worked with the operators. For example, we work very closely with Tata to build the Photon brand. I was very fortunate to actually work very closely on the Geo project, because 10 to 14 is when Geo was really building the network out. And I can tell you that, I have honestly never been that wrong in my life, because I spent so much time going to Geo every few months and trying to convince them to not do a pure 4G network, because, the propagation is less, you need too many networks, it's too expensive, you don't have any fallback. So you get either 4G or nothing. I was like, this is not going to work in India. And I'll never forget this, that in one of the meetings, I forget it was JT Bhai or Manoj Modi, or one of them said, after some time, to my CEO, saying that, आप technology सिखा दो, धंधा हम देख लेंगे. Right? It was like the most humbling experience of my life. Right? And I left in late 2014 and I joined Practo in 2014, and 2015 is when Geo launched, right? And I kind of witnessed from the outside all the craze that was going on about, they spent 700 crores and 1,000 crores in marketing and Shah Rukh Khan and all this. And I was like, guys, you don't realize they spent 4 years spending $27 billion of capex before selling a single SIM card. Okay, this 100 million is not even showing up in decimal point 2 of that Excel sheet. Nobody cares about this 100 million. But, it really gave me, I think, some grounding in understanding how large scale businesses that require physical infra actually work, right? And how, when you can reimagine without any historical baggage, how disruptive it can be. Right? It can really upend the entire ecosystem. And yeah, it takes deep pockets, it takes capital, it takes patience, it takes grit to build it. But ultimately, it is worth it, right? And then prior to that, obviously, I was at NVIDIA. I spent 3 years there. I was at NVIDIA just when we launched CUDA, which has now become AI and the entire thing. And I remember launching it in India and Middle East, which are my regions, and people telling us, who's going to use a supercomputer under the desk? What is the point? So we were trying to struggle and explain why protein folding is sexy and SETI at home is sexy and all of those things. But insane respect for Jensen for, staying at that for 17 years and converting that into AI. But again, like if you really think about what he has built, it's not just about the GPUs. All those kind of like, that was what the core idea has been for 17 years, that GPUs and parallel processing is way better than CPUs. But he has also taken a full stack approach of saying, I will not just build the GPU, I will build the link, I will build the underlying silicon, I will build like the entire stack, which will accelerate computing by 100x, maybe 1000x, right? And then that has kind of become, so, so there is a lot of this, different things that I have, been very fortunate to actually be working on, I think at the right place, the right time in some ways. And I think when we sort of bring some of these, at least basic understandings to Superhealth, it allows us to sort of imagine a world where You build a healthcare provider that is full stack, which has a strong network of distribution of hospitals that they own and control. So the quality is strong. They're able to reverse integrate into the devices and medicines for that reduction of fat in the system, because they're all sitting at 80-90% gross margins. It doesn't make any sense for commodities to have that. And ultimately build a much more efficient healthcare system as the stack and deliver that higher care quality to people. So that's kind of like what my background is. I'm just not on the call, so I'll do a quick check. Manoj was employee 1, I think, at Practo. He joined immediately after college, just after Shashank and Lal started the company. He's been there for 15 years. He's done everything, pretty much like all self-respecting, early employees at startups. He's done sales. I think no one has spent more time convincing doctors to adopt software than Manoj. Okay. so, so he did that. He did the international expansion to multiple countries. But towards the last 2 years of his stint, right, I think he did a couple of very interesting things. One is he built Practo Care Surgeries as a business, which is essentially Practo's response to pristine care. And as part of that, he learned that this agent model will never make money in healthcare, because the typical P&L for this businesses is that if you make 100 rupees from the customer, 60 of that goes to the hospital and the doctor, right? 40 goes to the hospital, 20 goes to the doctor, because the doctor is not going to leave 22% of his commission, right? And then 30% essentially is your CAC, because you're on the treadmill to acquire customers, and only 10% is basically what you get, right? So you can't really run a business like that, right? So his insight was the only way you can make money is to actually have your own hospital. So he then went and convinced Shashank to open Practo's first hospital, I think somewhere in Electronic City. And he and Dr. Alex owned it and ran it. I think in about 6-8 months, they got it to EBITDA positive, that hospital. And then they went back and wanted to do 100 centers. At that time, Shashank wanted to delay investments into a newer business for his strategic reasons. So Manoj, therefore, in December 2023, told Shashank that he's going to leave and try and build his own set of hospitals, because he thinks this is the right way to solve healthcare, that you have to be full stack. January, me and the four of us our wives and the two of us were having dinner together, and I was asking him what's going on at Practo, and I was telling him that I'm so frustrated at Apollo, because it's a big company, nothing moves fast, etc. And so he said he's left Practo, which was news to me. So I said, "Oh, that's insane! Like, what are you going to do now?" And he said, "Hey, I'm thinking about this hospital thing." And then I started talking to him about this idea that has become Superhealth, saying, "Hey, I was trying to do a similar thing, and here are my insights, and has already done." Then we said, "I got a hospital, and I start them." And so that's like I was saying earlier. So that's kind of what Manoj's background has been. Dr. Alex was part of the founding team at Narayana. This is way back when Dr. Devi Shetty was still at Manipal, and they were trying to set it up. He built all their medical processes. He built their first set of hospitals. He was their first medical director for the group. He was also the first CEO for Narayana. On the side for fun, he built this scheme with the government of Karnataka called Yashashwini Insurance Scheme, which is the insurance scheme for all citizens of Karnataka to give them very high quality, low cost insurance, health insurance. From seeing that, he actually got poached by Dr. Pratap Reddy to be the CEO for Apollo in Ahmedabad, which is a hospital he then built and ran for 5 years. After that, he quit that, and he and his colleague from Narayana, Dr. Roy, they got together and started a company called Medica in Calcutta, where they built, I think, like 6-7 hospitals. Each of these is like 300-400 beds, like proper large hospitals. They built and ran it for many years. He then exited that and moved back to Bangalore to be with his family. And at that time, joined Multiples, because Renuka, who was the founder of Multiples, had funded them in Medica when she was running ICICI Ventures. So she was doing a deal between Vikram Hospital and Global and so on. So she wanted an operating partner. So he joined Multiples as an operating partner for a couple of years to actually do that, essentially primarily to manage that transaction, because he knew Dr. Vikram from before and so on. And after that, he built SIMS in Chennai, because they had a medical college, and the promoter family, the father reached out to him saying that, "Hey, Dr. Alex, I need some help. Can you help me build a hospital?" So he built that hospital, meaning he designed it, he approved all the plans, he hired all the doctors, and he got that whole thing going. Seeing that, the MGM family reached out to him saying, "Hey, we also have a medical college. Why don't you build one for us?" So he built MGM Chennai also. We designed it, hired all the doctors, got everything going. He's still on the board for MGM Chennai. And after all this is when he came to Practo in, I think, 2015-16, which is where I met him. And then he tried in vain to teach me healthcare for 3 years, which I didn't learn, because I thought software is going to eat the world. I wish I had learned him before. You'd probably started Superhealth before. But, and so now, obviously, I can't imagine doing Superhealth without him. So, so that's how the three of us got together, and what we've been up to before Superhealth.
Very interesting, and very credible people going after this complex problem. Coming back to the hospital side of things, you did mention somewhere, these doctor-operated hospitals are also single specialty. There have been also incidents, like there have been attempts to build these single specialty hospital chains, like Cloud9 being one, which is doing quite well. There are others also, like eye care, a lot of those have done well. And kidney, renal things also, things have scaled. So what is your view? Like, while I understand that, that LTV thing that you're talking about from a single specialty standpoint does not work out. But how these, emerging,
Yep.
they're able to do well, these chains.
I think that's a great question. Yeah. See, the only one which has been massively successful actually have been, in the sense that they've built a strong business have been, the centers that you mentioned like Cloud9 or, even Rainbow, for example, right? Or you look at, Dr. Agarwal's from an eye clinic standpoint, they've done, eye care standpoint, they've done a great job. I think two things happen there, right? Like over time, for them to move into a higher value segment is not great. So I'll give you an example, right? So for example, if you look at Rainbow, which is a public listed company, you look at their data from public filings, right? They do about 1,000 crores plus 1,200 crores out of revenue for mother and child, essentially, right? I can promise you that if Apollo was to break out their revenue for that same sector, right, it would be more than them, at least similar. And they're not even trying, right? Because essentially, if you think of hospitals as a retail business, revenue per square foot for pediatrics is not as high, right? So what ends up happening because of that is that while it's a good business, right, you will find that the investor success is a little bit attenuated, which then has a lot of model complexities. The second thing that you will also understand is that if you look at other than some of the mother and child centers, you look at others, like for example, you look at Sparsh, right? Or you look at Shalby, or you look at even Narayana for that matter, which started as heart hospital, right? Every single one who has had some success in single specialty then wants to do multi-specialty, right? And other than Narayana, which is still trying, no one else has been able to make that brand transition, right? Because let's say if tomorrow someone like Rainbow tells you that, hey Amit, I'm great at pediatrics, I'm also great at knee replacement, you're like, no, I don't trust you, right? But as an example, if you have a really serious problem with your child, you will trust Max for it, right? You will trust Max for yourself and for your kid, right? Minus the sniffles and fever and all, right? Like, so you just basically if you start as the journey from single specialty to multi-specialty as a brand is extremely hard and almost guaranteed to fail, right? So far in the history of the industry. Secondly, for us, we realize that, the cost difference between building a single specialty unit and a multi-specialty unit is not that much actually, right? Because the room the same hai, OT roughly same hai. You just have a little bit more equipment cost, which anyway is financed. But the leverage you can do on that asset is much more, right? So what that does is that it fundamentally improves your model from a P&L standpoint, and therefore you're able to offer better experience and costing to customers, right? And of course, that translates into LTV and so on. Essentially, it gives you better asset utilization. And therefore, even if you see it from an investor standpoint, because I'm just using investor not from a financial gain standpoint, but more from a value creation standpoint, you will find that most of the multi-specialty hospitals trade at very different multiples in the market compared to single specialty, right? Because just the ability to sweat the asset, de-risk the business, seasonality of the business is very different, right?
Makes sense.
So, for example, and by the way, it's not like they're also not trying to do more things, right? So, for example, they started with mother and child. They're now trying to go upwards into more serious gynecology care. They're also trying to move horizontally towards IVF, which is, becoming an important thing. And I feel the more integrated they are, the better chances they have of success, just because they can own the customer for a longer time. And therefore, I think if it plays out at scale well enough, at least my prediction is that standalone IVF chains will not have as strong a business case going forward. The complexity in India for all this prediction that ends up happening, first of all, predictions are always fraught with risk. The nature of supply constraint in India is so strong that anything half decent ends up acquiring volume for sustainability, right? But is that the best way to do it? At least in our view, from the mathematics that we have seen, doesn't seem to be. And so we said, look, we are building from scratch. Eventually we want to, purpose is to solve all your healthcare problems, at least 99% of the healthcare problems. The chances that we can start from this and add a niche is much higher, given the history of the industry and how the consumers think, than what we have so far seen of people starting with a single brand and trying to do multiple. Right. And I think that's kind of like, I mean, it's not very different even from, in some ways, you took the Zara example earlier, right? But not every brand is able, it's a little bit easier in the fashion area. But, for example, Levi's makes great jeans, but how many people will buy a Levi's shoe, as an example? Or how many people will buy Nike jeans, as an example, right? So there are limits to the brand stretch, right? And at least in healthcare, we have seen that, it's hard for you to sort of change your, specialty once your customer has decided that this is who you are for.
Got it. And on the customer side, so what I understand is that anyone who can afford a Mac or a minor surgery also will go to Max, either through insurance or directly.
Cash,
And anyone who has to go through a complex surgery probably will kind of sell something to get there because the complexity has to be kind of taken care of. Now, what you're saying is, but 95% of the surgeries are not those. So they can be handled here. So, but who is your TG? Is your TG who is going to these neighborhood hospitals and saying, I could make maybe 30, 40, 50% premium. But that's about it. Or a different set of people will start coming to you who will say that, okay, why go to Max in a simple surgery? This is a hospital I trust. It's in the neighborhood. I've spoken to the doctor. I've done the OPDs. Last time also was good experience. So like, are you kind of just saying you are a better 50-bed neighborhood hospital and that's why you will do well? Or you're saying that you will also be able to kind of pull customers from?
I think it'll be both, Amit. See, the point is that today, why is the guy going to Max? So let's take the 1% out, which is the ultra complicated cases, right? Because we are not solving for those, and only Max and the tier 1 hospitals kind of solve for those. It's not, so that's a different one. So let's forget that. Assume you can pay for it, you will go there. If you can't pay for it, you'll probably end up going to a government hospital. But everybody else today, right? It's not, why are they going to Max and not? It's not like people with money like to burn money, right? The reason we all go to these tier 1 hospitals is because we have very low confidence in the quality of the neighborhood hospital. Now, in our experience of having visited 200 hospitals, lack of trust is not without reason, right? There are glaring gaps in all of these areas. And, having been to these 200, I am inclined to go to them even less. But what that tells you, right, is that there is a massive quality gap available here. It's not just a price play. It's a 10x better quality play. Now, if you flip it to let's talk about the 95% segment first, right? Like for them, we are saying that not everybody, but there is a large segment of people here who can pay, instead of 70,000 rupees, they can pay 20, 30,000 rupees more. They can pay 95,000 rupees, right? If I give them 10 times better quality of care, plus as bonus, it is extremely easy to access because you have concierge care and you can just call and there's no wait time, etc. Instant discharge, fixed pricing, all that. Now let's flip it to the guy going to Manipal, right? If in majority of the cases, I am able to convince them through the word of mouth in the community that, hey, Superhealth has great doctors and great quality of outcomes, right? And maybe that'll take us 2 years to do it. That's fine, right? But at that point, the question he will have is that, well, my stomach hurts. I don't know what's wrong. So let's say if your stomach is hurting, it could be acidity, it could be appendicitis, it could be stomach cancer, but you don't know. Your stomach hurts, right? So at that point, what you want is fastest path to a good doctor, right? And as long as Superhealth provides that, we will always be your first port of call. And then everything else is around the experience you have in the center, right? The kind of doctor you have. So how do you judge the doctor, right? Because it's fundamentally a quality question. Right? Because cost, there is no question. We are way better than Manipal, right? For that segment going to Manipal today. So if my doctor is high quality, which in India is defined as, at least 12 years plus 12 to 15 years of minimum experience as a specialist, and he's incentivized to not make you wait. He's incentivized to spend time with you, and he's incentivized to not prescribe you stuff that you don't need, which means all the behavior in the right term, because this is how people judge doctors today, right? How much time did he spend? All of that. Then the good behavior will drive trust, right? And the trust will drive some amount of people trying us out from that segment, right? And then that word of mouth will get more and more people to come here, right? Like, so that's how we see it, because we at no point are we saying that this is a lower quality hospital than tier 1. In fact, our pitch is that we deliver the same quality of care as tier 1. That's what we are solving from an infra standpoint, from a doctor standpoint. But we have figured out a model which allows us to do it at half the price. So now the question becomes that, hey, if there is a hospital near your house where you don't have to wait, which is half the cost, has the same quality of care, why would you go to Manipal for it? Right? It's not like, well, let's also realize that it's not like people are in love with these hospitals. Right? So there is a lot of dissatisfaction. They don't have a choice. This is, I think, the first part of the construct. Right? I think the second part of the construct, equally important, is the insurance providers. See, all three people are stuck in this model. Let's understand. The patient is stuck. We all know why. He has no option. The doctor also has no option. By the way, also the insurance provider has no option, right? Because if you are somebody who's wants to go to Manipal, no matter how much this insurance player doesn't want to pay that high amount of money as a payout, he has no choice, because he cannot meaningfully tell you to go to the small hospital because the care quality is poorer. You know it, you're not going to go. But if Superhealth came along and said that, hey, we have the same quality, and Amit agrees, right? And then by default, from without the insurance even saying, you are like, I go to Superhealth more often. As that brand starts happening, insurance people will drive more patients to us saying, hey, our preferred partner is Superhealth. They give instant discharge, they give instant admission, lower cost, etc. Go there, we'll cover 100% no copay. Because structurally for me, their payout is half. True. Right? And I have done the hard work of convincing the customer that I have quality. Right? So even the structured players like insurers will start pushing patients to us, saying that, hey, Superhealth is a preferred partner. You should go there. Right? There's a Superhealth center coming near you now. Right? So I think the maintaining the quality and finding a model that allows us to reduce the cost is the fundamental thing, right? And of course, experience you want to build, because that's what our ethos is, right? Like, why should people wait? They're already sick. Like, don't make them wait. So, so we are spending enormous amount of time with our architects and their design teams to design flows, to design building around the patient and doctor flows, right? So I can give you a very simple example, right? It doesn't even cost more. I'll give you a very basic one. See, if you look at the patient flow, you study this from, by the way, most hospitals are not designed by patient flows, which just blows my mind. That's a separate debate for a topic another day. But if you look at 100 patients walking into a hospital today, 90 people out of the 100 require a consultation, diagnostics, and medicines, and they go home. Right? There is no admission. Of the 10 who get admission, 5 have a medical admission, which means there is no procedure, right? There is ICU bed, oxygen, nurse. That's all they need, right?
IV. Yeah.
Only, right? IV, all that, right? So only 5 are surgical admissions where some procedures required. 4 out of the 5 have a length of stay less than 2 days, right? So this is the flow breakup. Now imagine that 90% of the people are just doing OPD in your hospital. Why don't you just build the whole thing on the ground floor? Why is the guy going to 6 places in the building? Right? Not because it's easier for the patient, not because it's easier for the staff, not because it's easier for the doctor, but because it's easier for the architect and no one thought about it. It's not like it costs more to put everything on the ground floor. It doesn't. Right? I'll give you another simple one. A gastroenterologist, the doctor, right? He has to do endoscopy and stuff like that, right? Now his OPD is on some floor. Endoscope is built on some other floor. What logic is this? Now he'll spend 1 hour going there and coming back in the middle of his OPD, so his patients are waiting. He'll get caught by some patient's relative on the way. Lift will not come in time because an hospital lift never comes on time because 90% patients are roaming around in that big building. Why? So in our design, we built it behind his cabin. So it takes him 20 seconds. No one can interject. He can go in the middle of his OPD, he can go in, do this for 10 seconds and come out and go back to treating the patients he was treating, right? So it's not like this cost us more. Actually, it cost us less because lift is getting used less, doctor time is getting wasted less. So if you kind of start reimagining this from a clean slate, right, we realize that you can actually build significantly better quality outcomes also, right, than what is coming even in tier 1 hospitals today while building efficiencies. It's possible. There is a lot of fat in the system. So that's kind of how we feel that when this starts happening, right, in our centers, patients from both sides will come. Some will come for 10x quality and, little bit premium pricing. Some will come for same quality and half the pricing and 10 times easier access. 100% will they come to us? No. But I only need 4% to fill my hospital. So it's good enough.
Got it. So a couple of other things, somewhere you mentioned that when that star doctor moves hospitals, on day one, even he is not able to fill the beds. So your day one, when you are completely kind of building the demand from scratch, it will also take time, like
Yes.
these things. So how do you kind of, the brands that we know, they've been there for 10 years. So at some point, if you make these choices, maybe there's a brand, but that brand takes time. So how do you kind of solve for that in the interim?
That's a great question. So see, the two things. The first thing what we have done is that if you kind of look at the ramps that we have created, right? For us to break, see, 4% is for max capacity, max profit, max everything, right? We can't accommodate even a single patient beyond that once we hit 4%, right? But the way we have done the reason why this 50 beds is now so critical, right, is because in the first year for me to break even, this needs to only be 1.3%. So if 100 people are doing OPD in the neighborhood of my hospital, which means they're going out and meeting a doctor in a clinic or a hospital, if one of them comes to Superhealth, or my 1.3 of them, right, come to Superhealth, I will break even. Right? It's with that 30% occupancy, so on, right? And the conversion we have taken from OP to IP for our model, the industry average is 8 to 12%. At full scale, we have taken 4% of 4%, right? So not 10%, because our core thesis also is that 20-30% of these procedures are not required. Right? They're just getting prescribed because of sales targets. At the same time, at the start for the first year, right, what we need to be on plan and break even in 12 months essentially is 1% of 1%. Right? So the reason why we're changing the model like this is because it reduces significant pressure on having to fill beds. That's why 50 beds, right? And that's why we're only doing private rooms. We're not doing ward beds, all that. The second part of this is that our marketing for this actually starts 3 to 6 months before launch, right? And that is layered in 3 ways. So the first is that Superhealth will not be like a cute healthcare brand. Like I was telling you earlier, right? We will be an aggressive brand that will go out there and tell customers that we are a hospital which does not do commissions like everybody else does. So we are going to take the industry head on and directly address the pain points of the customers through our marketing, saying 0 wait time, fixed price, instant discharge, no commissions, no sales targets for doctors, etc., etc. Right? All the key pain points that have trust loss. The second leg of that is, obviously this is hyper local, so there is all kinds of the usual marketing channels, etc. The second part, which is equally important, is that instead of doing this referral commissions in the neighborhood from other clinics, right, what we're doing is we're deploying a feet on street force that is, their job is to be mapped to each residential apartment complex in the community that we are in. And this person goes there every day to do health activities. Right? They're not trying to sell Superhealth. They're not trying to sell packages, blood checks, nothing. Their job is to just go every day and enable health activities that are already going on. Like people already doing running, people already doing laughter clubs, yoga, all of that. This guy will just facilitate that and make sure that there is some medical understanding behind how they're running. What should be the gate? So he does customer engagement, right? And then that becomes the first port of call for them to call when they have any healthcare need, right? You need medicines for your mom, you need an MRI, you need an X-ray scan, you want to come in for a consult, you want to start on a consult. The fastest way when your stomach hurts for you to get a doctor is to call your concierge. Right? There is no search, no book, nothing. Just call the guy. He will organize it instantly for you. Right? The third part of that is that today, because our core focus is to acquire the customer at OPD, and OPD has no loyalty, by the way. Right? Because if you see most of the customers today, they don't know where to go. Right? So when the stomach hurts, they'll put it in their WhatsApp group of the building. Where should I go? Stomach is hurting. Is there a good doctor, etc. Or they'll go online and search. Right? Which means what? Right? Which means that they actually don't know where to go and they don't have an easy path to that. So our goal, therefore, is to become the easiest path to do this. Right? And over the first year, we will ramp this up to 1% of market share. Because see, what we must also realize is that unlike many other industries, in healthcare, we cannot create demand. We can only capture it. We can only fulfill it. And so what we have tried to do is to, create significant push on the core anxieties of customers in healthcare and offer them a better, like 10 times better path, same assurance of quality and half the price, or slight premium in some cases. But there is no premium on OPD. Right? OPD is the same $700. So now if I said without any waiting, your stomach is hurting, I can get you to a doctor ASAP in level 0 wait time for the same $800 you were paying somewhere else. Why would you not come here? Right? So I think it's very underappreciated how low the loyalty in general is with doctors, right? Like people are willing to switch for convenience extremely because we are in extreme convenience economy, right? And this patient is at my stomach hurt stage. He's not at I need cancer treatment, which is the end of the funnel, which is where every hospital and every doctor fights for the patient, right? But no one fights at OPD. So it's open actually, which is why if you see every hospital's communication, their communication is, hey, my robot is great. But the patient doesn't know at stomach hurts whether the robot is good or not, right? So if you sort of like look backwards and say, okay, what is his life today, given this context of what we are building, right? So today, if you're a patient who wakes up in the morning and stomach hurts, here is how it will go today, right? Pre-Superhealth. You will, try to find out some offline guy. They will tell you that this offline guy is good, but he's available at 4 p.m. वो सुबह तो hospital जाते हैं, clinic शाम को बैठ. Something like that will come back to you, right? So you have to wait till 4 p.m. But let's say you don't want to wait till 4 p.m. So what will you do? You have two options, right? You can go to a hospital and wait for 3 hours or 2 hours and see an OPD guy over there. This is your first option. Pay $1,500, $2,000, whatever for the consultation. That's what on average any tier 1 hospital anyway charges. Or you can go online and pay $500, $800 to do a consultation online. So let's say you start with online. Right? So you do online, you paid $800, you did a consult. 50-60% of the times that consult cannot solve your problem, right? Because physical examination required or test is required or the doctor is late, whatever. Now you have to go do something offline, either at a clinic or at the hospital. So you paid $100, but the online company and the offline company are different companies. So you can't talk to the same doctor offline. Now you go offline to the hospital and you wait for 2 hours and you pay $1,000. Then this guy will see you in OPD and he'll prescribe you some 3 tests. Then you'll either do the test in the hospital, which means you'll pay 8 to 10,000 rupees for basic blood tests, and MRI will be even more. Or you go and do it outside. If you go and do it outside or inside, other way, at least 1 hour you have to wait. Then you have to bring this report back to the same doctor because he's not going to see it online and tell you all this. Then again, you're waiting for 1 hour for the follow-up, right? Now, let's say this doctor says, okay, actually, your issue is serious. It looks like you have an appendix infection, whatever. Please go to this Apollo hospital or Max hospital or Manipal hospital or whatever and meet this doctor, right? So now immediately you'll go to this hospital to meet this doctor, right? Now, the minute you meet this doctor is going to make you again wait because there's one more hospital is there. This guy will not see you for free. So now you'll pay him a consultation fee for the 3rd time. Then he will examine you, tell you, okay, this is right, you can get admitted now. Now, once he tells you can get admitted, he will not tell you how much it's going to cost. He'll say, please go to the admission desk. Right? The admission desk will give you this and say, okay, you first go to the billing desk and get an estimate. When you go to the billing desk in the hospital, that billing desk will tell you that I have discharged patients waiting for last 2 hours. You please sit in line. This is what will happen to you. After all this happens, you'll go home with some parchi which will say this will cost you 3 lakhs. Right? Or let's say if you're going to a small hospital, they'll tell you 1 lakh rupees lagega, 60,000, 70,000 rupees lagega. Now, imagine that you spent before you got any treatment done. Nothing has been fixed so far. Your appendix still hurts. You have now spent 6 hours just waiting to meet Dr. 1, Dr. 2, Dr. 3 and tests in between. I'm not even getting into the fact that it takes you 45 minutes to do an MRI. Right? I'm just talking waiting time. It's also quite insane that today in India, you cannot book radiology tests anywhere. Right? You can't. Right? Because you have to go to that center, take one paper ka parchi and sit in line. And jab number aega, tab aega. Sounds pretty ridiculous to me. Right? Like, why can't you do it? As opposed to now, imagine Superhealth. Right? In Superhealth, your stomach hurts, you call your concierge, you already know who he is. He comes every day. Last 6 months, every day, he's coming and meeting you in the building. So you know the guy. You call him and say, Ravi, stomach hurts. Ravi, we have full-time doctors. So there is no selection, no search, nothing. Ravi connects the doctor. Right? Within 15 minutes, you get the doctor on call. Doctor tells you what's wrong with you. Doctor tells you, hey, this is a serious issue. You should get a ultrasound done. And the minute is ultrasound done, it gets organized by Ravi in Superhealth, in the center. And our center is only 3 kilometers away from you at worst, because that's the radius we're looking at, right? So 15 minutes you can be at Superhealth. The center is already booked for ultrasound for you. You come in, our cost structure is lower, so we are giving you the same price as a diagnostic center, maybe slightly even lower. Right? You see the ultrasound, instantly the report goes to the doctor. Doctor sees the ultrasound report and tells you on chat only what is wrong with you, what is the test required. If he says you need an appendectomy, our system plugs in the exact price. We tell you what time we can do it, what time you can come in, you can do it. So it is like done in 5 minutes, right? And you have to pay $800 for this, right? So I think the minute we get so like this is the clean version of what happens, right? But let's also understand that even though in our model we have not factored in the fact that we are asking doctors to bring patients, right? That doesn't mean the doctors will abandon their patients, right? So when these doctors join us, there will be some patients who will naturally shift because they want this doctor. So between the marketing, the concierge, and some existing patients or doctors, we believe we have extremely well sort of sorted from building the initial set of patients, the cold start problem, right? And for us to break even, only 1% is required. So, from that perspective, we've tried to keep the model in a manner where, and obviously in 3 to 6 months, no matter which industry you're in, no matter how new or old you are, whatever you do, it takes you 1 to 2 years to build that brand love. So that will not be very different for us. But we've at least tried to solve for these things where we can drive the OPD trials. So this is kind of like our second sort of strategy, right? The third strategy is something that, we are still debating internally whether to try it or not. It's a little bit of a crazy idea. But I think it's kind of like a massively disruptive idea. So at least, I'll tell you what our thoughts are, and we'll figure out how to implement it. So one of the things is that structurally in OPD, nobody ever makes money, right? OPD is not where you make money in a hospital. That's not the point. So what if I launch a VIP access pass to Superhealth, which says that, hey, $1,000 a year, all family of 4 is covered, unlimited OPD, and any test prescribed by my doctor is covered. So which directly goes to my pitch to a customer, saying that if we overprescribe you tests, right, we are paying for it. You are not paying for it. So I am incentivized financially to not prescribe you extra tests, right? It's like prescribe you what you need. Now, for you to not do OPD at Superhealth is just stupid, because the difference is $1,000 a year versus 10,000 rupees if radiology gets prescribed. Why do you not do it at Superhealth, right? So what that allows you to do is actually, probably, get maybe not just 4% or maybe 15% of the market share, right? And then we have other problems of how to solve it from a queuing standpoint, but that's one mega lever that we have, from a customer standpoint to come in, because anyway, the P&L requires us to have IP going. So the faster my OPD is full, the faster my IP will be full. And so these are 3-4 ways in which we've tried to sort of, create a structure that allows us a bunch of these, OPs to come in. And that makes us pretty confident that, we'll be able to scale this within a couple of years.
But Varun, one more thing, like, let's say the hospital has built a brand a little bit, the customer is flowing, but the moment they get a surgery prescribed, is a fresh decision to be taken, right? So if someone prescribes me let's say if another hospital prescribes me a surgery, I'll take a second opinion because maybe it's not a surgery that I need to undergo. If, let's say, Superhealth, which is not in the business of prescribing unnecessary surgeries, prescribes a surgery to me, then I would believe that I need a surgery. And at that point, I'll say, okay, it's a fresh call. Let me see where I want to do the surgery.
Yes.
I definitely need to get the surgery because the most conservative hospital is telling me so. And at that point, I'll call someone in my kind of family, some GP, someone, say, okay, who is the doctor, which is the best doctor? And they will kind of say, oh, ये Superhealth नए बच्चे नहीं चाहिए, ये डॉक्टर है इतने साल से, वहाँ जाओ, हो जाएगा. That will always play out, right?
I think for the initial years that will still happen. So just to tell you that, today, like I was saying, the typical hospital is looking at this conversion from OP to IP at 10%, from OP to IP admission. At full scale, our view is that this 10% is probably more than what the patients really need. So probably from a medical need standpoint, we are more at 7% of people need it or 8% of people need it maybe. So let's say 7%. At our maximum capacity, we need only 4% of the 4% to convert, right? So that's the first part. So we have structurally tried to make sure that, we have indexed onto saying that, hey, even with this low thing, we will be able to do. The second part of this is that let's explore that journey of a customer who has now been prescribed a surgery at Superhealth, right? And he says, no, I need a second opinion. So from an industry standpoint, typically 20 to 30% people take a second opinion once some of these kind of surgeries get prescribed. And of that, 70 to 80% people, after taking the second opinion, come back and do it at the first center, right? Because they're just trying to validate ki such hai, jhoot hai, whatever, right? But let's say this person is genuinely looking at options, saying ki maybe Superhealth is new, should I do it, not do it, etc. Right? So now what is his game plan? Right? Now the first game plan is that majority of them are anyway getting it done at a neighborhood center, right? The minute he steps into Superhealth versus a neighborhood center, the decision is made, right? Because the infra is so amazing. right? Like it looks like a tier 1 hospital, right? It is built to a spec that you expect in a very large high-end hospital, right? Number one. Number two, let us say this is so there itself, the hygiene, the quality of everything itself will be like, oh, I should do it at Superhealth, is better, right? Then it's a question of, hey, does my insurance cover it? Is the affordability there, etc., etc. And then some premiumness we charge, and they'll be like, okay, it looks 10 times better as a hospital, so I should go. The second part of this is that let us say you're somebody who actually can afford Manipal but came here for OPD because whatever, right? Now, when you go to these tier 1 centers, right, what is going to happen to you? You don't have a Ravi to call, right? So you'll book an appointment, show up. But even if you book an appointment, you'll wait maybe an hour, hour and a half at least to see the doctor. Then the doctor will see you for 2 minutes, right? Then he'll prescribe you the exact same surgery that we have prescribed, right? I don't know what these bubbles are, but okay. So he'll prescribe you the same surgery we have prescribed. Then he'll send you to the admission desk, right? And then you will wait for 1 to 2 days to get this estimate, right? And then the estimate would come, which is twice the price of what we are saying, right? Now, as a patient, you have two options, right? You can do this, go to this center, which is telling you, which you don't really trust very well, which everybody is saying, oh, faltu mein surgery karte hain, whatever, etc. Or you can come to Super and then half the cost. Now, the question will be, who will do my surgery, right? The minute they look at that, right, and you should ask Dr. Alex because he can talk a lot more about this because this is what he's done all his life, hiring great doctors. Right? He will look at this and say, okay, I'm going to do this doctor. This doctor has 15 years of experience. He's a specialist at Superhealth. Right. In the past, he has worked at some of these bigger hospitals. So this is a great doctor, and he spent 10-15 minutes explaining to me patiently what अच्छा doctor है, वो फालतू में prescribe नहीं किया उसने. Because since customers don't have medical understanding, right, they look at these other qualitative ways in which assessing whether they like a doctor or not, right? The really smart sales doctors actually, by the way, are very good at creating that assurance impression. That there's a doctor in Jayanagar, right, and phenomenal, like very decent hands as a surgeon, but phenomenal sales guy, right? He will sit with an elderly gentleman to do his orthopedic surgery and hold his hand and say, don't think you have only a son in the US. I am also like your younger son. Now, once he says things like this, how will you not do the surgery there, right? So there is a lot of this that ends up happening in these centers, right? So what I'm trying to say is that the decision often is not made on medical quality, but the cues to what they think is medical quality, which is the age of experience of the doctor, how he spoke to me, how well he explained to me, how much time he spent with me, what the hospital, everything looks like, right? And how easy it was, and how much it looks like they have their shit together, right? Like how professional it looks, right? So we feel that with all of this going on, we will be able to get at least 3 to 4% of these people to convert to us, right? At 4%, we are full. So the industry does 10%. We are saying at best case, even at full maturity, we will never do more than 4% because we have only 50 beds, right? So we are full at 4%. So we feel that even prescribed 10%, let's say 8% is prescribed because 8 is actually real, let's say, right? We need half of that to come to us instead of the 8 to 10% that the hospitals typically do, right? So half of them may leak. And over time, as we get the network built out, I think this 4 will only increase. Or at least it will become faster and faster for us to get to the 4 because, people will just know that super centers don't do this as a behavior. They don't prescribe random things. They're good doctors. And also the word of mouth in the doctor community is very strong, right? It's a very, very close-knit community, right? So when you try to fake this whole thing now, where you're faking the whole targets nahi hai, sales goal nahi hai, which is what most hospitals do, right? Because on paper, they cannot say you have a sales target. But they review MG, they review IOP, IP conversion, they review all this, right? So obviously there is a target. If you don't do it, right, then the word in the hospital, in the doctor community spreads very, very fast as well. So that also kind of lends to authenticity for us.
So while I was doing my diligence, I spoke to a lot of doctors, visited a few hospitals. Some kept me waiting. While it was not a patient, I was coming there patient. In fact, Vishal and I went to meet a doctor. We had double confirmed the appointment and all. And when we went there was no doctor. And the doctor stopped picking our calls. And we came back. We couldn't do the diligence also. We wanted to understand how you're running that hospital. So I understand all those bad experiences that a patient goes through and, but one of the person I was speaking to, and that he said it in as many words, but the sentiment was the same across people. Whoever has spent a lot of time in the industry, they kind of say that either you can build a business or you can run a trust.
Yeah.
Like the business and ethics in healthcare don't go together. If you are ethical, if you are not prescribing surgeries that should not be prescribed, if you're not prescribing tests that should not be prescribed, if you're not giving targets to doctors, that business will not work. That's
Yes.
a very strong sentiment. As founders, we are like misfits. We're trying to kind of, figure that out and, kind of find us. I understand that. And that's why I could, kind of still move ahead because I know that, because I said, okay, what is the depth in that perception? But that perception is very strong. How does that come in the way? And
It's not, Amit, it's not a perception. It's right. He's absolutely right. The model as it exists today cannot function without this. Right? That's why this vicious loop and issue exists. Right? So as a hospital, let me play this journey out. Right? Like earlier I was talking about this. As a hospital, I have no differentiation. Right? Apollo, Max, Narayana, Manipal, whatever. Customers think all big hospitals are the same, basically. Right? So how do I get customers? The way I get customers is by acquiring the doctor
Buying
practices,
revenue.
by buying revenue. Right? Basically. Right? Now the minute that happens, there is the negative incentives are now at play. Correct? Because first of all, I have lost all ability to enforce any quality standards from an experience standpoint or medical. Because doctor will do what he wants because he's the guy bringing the revenue. So imagine you're a tech company in which your engineer, product, and marketing is the same guy, and try to get him to come at 10 a.m. Not going to happen. So the same thing is happening with the doctors here, right? Now, if you continue to pursue the same model of capex, which is what all of them do today, it is impossible for you to make money unless you do this.
But how will it work for you?
Yeah. So for us, what we did, the first thing we did was we said, look, if we are not doing that 1% surgeries, we can have a massive reduction in capex because we can just make everything hyperlocal, right? So what that does is that it takes us to about 30 lakh rupees, I think 35 lakh rupees a bed instead of 2 crores a bed. So that's the first. That allows us to significantly reduce the pressure on revenue, which means that even with structurally as a model, even if we prescribe only the surgeries that people need, and of that only half of them convert to us compared to the industry average, we are still wildly profitable. Right? Like this still even there is 30% EBITDA because their problem is the capex model. I'll give you a very simple example, right? Like a tier 1 hospital, recently bought this. I think in Apollo we had this center we bought in Gurgaon, right? Magnolia's के opposite, right?
Yeah, see.
Right? Publicly
It's to
reported.
reconstitute.
हाँ 800 करोड़ दिया है 3 साल हो गया उसको. और litigation चल रहा है, right? Because the reason is because all the large land in main areas is available only because dispute. So you need to be someone with high levels of ability to undispute it and clean the land deeds, right? So now the case is in the court, 3 साल से case चल रहा है, right? So 10% cost of capital is 800 crore has already become 1050 crores, right? Cost of capital itself. I was reading in their annual report for the last quarter saying that FY25 or FY26 is when this will get cleared, right? So let us say they overachieve that and this year only gets cleared, so that 1050 crores. It'll take 3 years to make the hospital. So that's another 250 crores of capital loss of 3 years of not seeing any patient. So this has now become 1300 crores. Plus 300-400 crore construction का cost. So you're not 1800 crores. 17 से 1800 crore पे आप पहुंच गए before you see a single patient. So now you will say that even if this hospital is 500 beds, they are at almost 3 to 4 crores of cost per bed. So they will have high price. Who will pay for all this? You and I will only pay for all this as patients, right? Company has to pay for all this. So now if you look at healthcare structurally as a cost structure, right? There are 5 costs. Right? There is a land cost, there is a construction cost, there is a device cost, there is a medicine cost, and there is a people cost, right? Each of these things have to reduce for this to become half the cost that customers want, right? In some way, right? So where industries today, it can actually probably be less than half. The way what we are doing is that because we're doing 50 beds and we have made this compact and the way we've done the design, we don't need to buy any land, we don't need to do any construction. We can take an existing office building and convert it into a hospital in 4 to 6 months. So today, for example, Cloud9 does something very similar. And, from what I understand from their suppliers, they do this in about 4 months. So they sign the lease of a new building, which is not an existing hospital. It's like any commercial building in which you could build a WeWork, you could build any commercial office. They take that building and they convert it into a Cloud9 hospital and they see the first patient in 130 days today. And they do about 10 hospitals a year. They do this today, right? This is world pre-Superhealth. So already they do this. We are saying for the first one, we may take a little bit longer because you have to finalize the design. This is the first time we'll make some mistakes, etc. But over time, we can do this also in at least 6 months, if not 4 months, right? That significantly accelerates reduces my capex waste time. The second thing is, yeah, exactly. Cost. Thank you. That's cost of travel. The second important thing is that, for us to actually convert this into a hospital is only 3,500 rupees to 3,700 rupees a square foot, right? And the way we've designed it, we need only about 30,000 square foot of space. So my construction cost is basically 10 and a half, 11 crores only. And the second thing that we have done is that majority of the equipment is financed over a 10-year finance, right? So that we've converted that to OPEX. So there is no major CAPEX, right? So what this allows us to do essentially is to actually go live with a hospital with just 12 to 14 crores of CAPEX. Maybe 15 crores, let's take mota 15 crore. As opposed, and this is a 50-bed hospital, right? So that's like, say, 30 lakhs a bed, approximately, right? As opposed to 3 years to 5 years, right? And then all of that additional cost. This fundamentally makes the construction and the land problem go away, right? Because we are able to basically convert it to 50 rupees per square foot rental, right? Which is like 5-6% of our top line, or maybe 7% of our top line, right? So that allows us to fundamentally reduce cost for customers, significantly accelerate time to market, And therefore, what that does is it allows us to build these smaller units and have no penalty of, in some ways, could I have built a 100-bed hospital here? Maybe, just build another one, it's okay. Every hospital is profitable by itself, right? The reason why other people obsess over these beds is because it takes them 5 to 6 years to add beds, right? If they got 500 beds, they have to make more 500 beds, they'll take them 5 years more. The land may not be available. Or I don't have that problem. So for me, the minute I see this first hospital is nearing
The units
capacity,
are
and
smaller in
I can just make it, and I can just make the next one like a kilometer away, and people will start coming there also. Because for me, the play for profitability is not scale. Each unit will be profitable by itself, right? And therefore, if I have to build 3 units, there is enough demand in the market, sure. And there is a reasonable case to be made for this, Amit, right? Like if I have the best quality, I have great value pricing and the most convenience. Why should I stop at only 4% market share? I should take 20%. But we are saying, hey, we don't know today. So we will start with this. If we have to add more hospitals and make the concentration denser, we'll make it. What is the problem?
But so this I understand, but the first hospital will take longer. And somewhere the way your plans are, you're saying that we will need capital for this first hospital, but thereafter other hospitals, the 49 next hospitals before you plan to IPO,
Yes.
will be kind of funded through this first hospital, then will spawn to other hospitals, and then. So can you just take us through that?
Yeah, sure, absolutely. So basically, what we're doing is this raise is to get the first center going, right? And this first center will take us in our planning. What we have done is we have said from signing of lease to seeing the first patient will take us 12 months because we'll get some things wrong. Maybe we have to do the over. Although the quote we have from our contractors and architects is 6 months to go live with the first patient. These same guys do it today in 4 months for cloud9. So let's say 12 months. Then it takes us 12 months to break even, another 12 months to be fully profitable. So from signing of lease to EBITDA profitability is maximum 24 months for us, probably lesser at 18. And therefore, full profitability for us to be at that 4% and whatever will take us to about 60 crores of revenue in the following year, and approximately 18 crores of EBITDA and about 12 to 14 crores of cash flow. Right? 60 crores of revenue, because hospitals are loved by a lot of finance people. I mean, from bank financing guys, banks, etc. Because they're generally profitable, it's a good business. They are able to get up to 2x of top line as your debt, right? So we don't want to be over leveraged. So we're saying we'll do 1:1. So 60 crores of top line gets us 60 crores of loan plus 15 crores of cash flow I have. So I have access to 75 crores of capital. My cost of putting up one center is 15 crores, right? So what? And even if you add working capital in this, right? With this one hospital, I'll be able to build another 4 hospitals, giving me a total of 5 hospitals. In 2 years, those 5 hospitals are also generating our revenue, right? Because from the second hospital onwards, I will not take 1 year to make a hospital because my template is done, my structure is done, process is sorted, all of that is done. And then that basically keeps happening because let's understand that pre-world that sort of we come from, which is the venture capital, angel investment kind of world, minus this, all other hospitals were made X this. So there is a full capital structure existing today that allows hospitals to be funded. So that's not some innovation we're doing actually. Actually, our innovation is how to build the first hospital. Can you do it without debt, right? Can you do it with the support of great angels and maybe some amount of micro VCs and so on? So that allows us to build this quite easily. And, over time, that will then allow us to, as the capital pool increases because of the top line and all of that. So in that sense, the only question could be that, hey, Varun, what if it doesn't happen to 60 crores? What if it only 40 crores? Okay, so instead of building 4 hospitals, we'll 2 hospitals. Right? It's not a zero, right? You know what I'm saying? So I think in that sense, it's a good, strong model. And the reason we wanted to put this model, right, is because we want to make sure that the hospitals are self-sustaining and profitable so that the incentives remain aligned, right? Like there is no scenario in which our first hospital is not profitable and we say, hey, let's make 5 more. Now all will become. No, right? If that one is not profitable, we'd better fix that before making 5 more. So that's one of the constraints that we have put on ourselves through this model.